Hi, this is a video about a couple of sunfish knives that I've purchased and put new covers on over the last year or so. And I just wanted to kind of document them and tell a bit of the story around them. So this first knife started out as a Marbles white bone sunfish. I bought this when I first started getting into knife collecting 2 or 3 years ago, and mainly because I wanted an example of the pattern. Got into collecting and I wanted to get as many different varieties of patterns as I could. And this Marbles knife was pretty cheap. It's like $14, $15. And I felt at the time that the sunfish was just really kind of weird and not something I was really interested in. But I thought, for $15, I can get one and see what it's all about. And I did that for a number of different knives. Uh, anyway, I got the knife and I ended up really kind of liking it. Um, So I had that. I bought a few other sunfish that actually I liked a lot better than this one, and decided after a while that I was going to try and um, put new covers or scales on knives as, just kind of a hobby and see how that would go. So this was the first knife that I decided to work with, and mainly just because it was big and I thought that would make it a little easier to work with. Um, and also because since I had better sunfish available, I felt it was kind of expendable, knowing that the first attempt probably wouldn't come out real well. Uh, so the original knife had white bone scales on it. It also had two blades. I removed the smaller kind of pen blade from it, mainly because it was really impossible to pull it out. The pull on sunfish, or some sunfish, is very hard, and on that particular knife, the only way I could get the pen blade out was with pliers. Uh, so when I reassembled the knife, I just left it out. Um, The main blade on there has a fairly high pull as well, and I did attempt to fix that, and unfortunately I wasn't very successful. Um, this is, yeah, it can be done, but not very easily. So, um, one of the drawbacks of this knife. So, when I recovered it, I used walnut, which I got from a tree in my yard, and started putting that on it. I thought, it would be nice to kind of embellish it in some way. I didn't really want to keep it just plain, although that looks okay. And on the internet, I came across people using this technique of silver wire inlays on wood. And basically, you're taking a piece of wire and inlaying it into the wood. And it turns out that one of the best woods to do this with is walnut. So I thought, well, I'll try my hand at that too. And I came up with this design, kind of because I like penguins, and put this on here, and it came out pretty well. There's a few things about it that I don't really care for. Um, First one is, of course, I couldn't make the pull better. The second one is I didn't really care for all the rivets on there. It just felt like it detracted from it. These are the rivet positions from the original knife, so I just reused those. Um, if I was to do this one again, I would either do it without the rivets at all, or maybe just put two, one at each end. Anyway, I did this more or less pretty happy with it. You know, the finish and everything else about it came out pretty nice. Get in here pretty close, and you know, even though all this stuff is done by hand, it came out pretty well, so I was pretty happy with that. So after I finished it, I decided, well, you know, maybe I'll do another one of these, and something that would address some of the shortcomings of this and try to, you know, advance my knowledge and skill. So I started thinking about the next knife, and that kind of led to this one. So one of the things I decided to do was to take the bolsters off and just do a shadow pattern. So this particular knife actually started out as a Rough Rider Blue Mule, which is got silver bolsters and a blue micarta cover in the middle. And personally, I thought it was like pretty ugly. And I got it really cheap with the idea that I was going to do this to it, so I didn't really care what it looked like or started out as. And that knife also had the same pull problems on the secondary blade as this one. And I did the same thing. I just deleted that blade. You know, basically the Rough Riders and the marble knives pretty much come out of the same factory in China. So it's not too surprising that they would, you know, operate the same. Even though I think size-wise they're slightly different. I was able to fix the pull on this one of the main blade. This works much nicer than the other one did. So I wanted to make this with a shadow pattern, which is no bolsters. I thought that would give it more room for the design than what I had on this one, and it would probably be a little less cluttered looking. That's what I was after, is essentially a bigger canvas for the wire inlay. I was watching some YouTube videos on other people with who are into sunfish knives, and there's a few of them out there. One video I was watching was by Tobias Gibson, which is Knife Chats with Tobias, and he was showing a bunch of sunfish that he had, and he had one part of a video where he started talking about different things that he would like to see the manufacturers do, and different variations on the sunfish that he thought would be interesting. And he mentioned doing the shadow pattern like this without the bolsters, and I thought, oh, well, that's kind of cool. I'm thinking of doing the same thing. And then he said, you know, it would be kind of cool if they did that with a bird's eye pivot. And I thought, oh, that's a cool idea. I hadn't been thinking of that at all. So I incorporated that into it, and it's kind of hard to show because it's sort of shiny here, but this is my attempt at a bird's eye pivot. So I put that on there. I was also trying to figure out what kind of design to put on here, and so I was kind of kicking this around in my mind for months, actually. And last Thanksgiving, my brother-in-law came over, and I was showing him my knife collection, and I showed him this, the penguin one, and he was really kind of intrigued by it. He thought this was really cool. So I thought, well, you know, I'll make this second one and I'll give it to him. So this was always intended to be a gift to my brother-in-law. So I was still trying to figure out what kind of, design or motif to use on here. And I wanted something that he could relate to and that, applied to him. And he and my sister travel around out west a lot. In fact, they're getting ready to move out there. And I came across the idea of like putting mountains on it and started with the idea of just some kind of stylized mountains going up and down and didn't really care for the way that looked. Then I hit upon the idea of looking at some of the photographs that my brother-in-law had been sending me from all their trips out west, and thought, well, maybe I could find, some famous mountain he's been to and put that on here. Well, it turns out all the pictures I had were from them visiting canyons. And canyon pictures and a line drawing thing just don't work. So I couldn't figure out quite what to do. So I started thinking about recognizable mountains, and I thought about Monument Valley. And, they're these big buttes that you see out in the middle of kind of nowhere. And I thought, oh, that'd be really cool. So I started looking around for pictures of that and didn't really see anything that appealed to me. And then I thought, well, maybe my brother-in-law had been there before and had sent me pictures. And I looked back in my email, and sure enough, he had sent me pictures of Monument Valley, but they weren't his pictures. They were pictures his daughter had taken, my niece. And so I found one of the pictures and made this design from that. Basically, kind of in a computer, traced the line of the silhouette of the mountains from the photographs she took, and used it for this. And it came out, I think, pretty well. You can kind of see, if you look in real close, there's actually 3 pieces of silver in there, and the pivot. So that's basically where this came from and why I made it. I want to mention a couple other technical things I did on here before I go. The bird's eye pivot was made with a, see if I can get it to focus there, it doesn't want to. I started out with a brass rod and bored a hole in the middle of it, and then drilled out an area here to accommodate it, and then used a nickel silver pivot pin that goes all the way through. It works pretty well. When I sanded it down a bit, I may have sanded too far, so the pivot's a little loose, but it still works pretty well. To get the design onto here, I used my laser engraver, which is kind of new, and I took the design, as I said, from a photograph, and I processed it on the computer to make just the simple line, outline of the mountains. And in the laser engraver, I was able to put this in the engraver and have the laser draw the line across here. That I found was a lot easier than the technique I used on this knife, where I printed the picture onto a piece of paper and had to scale it in the computer, and I wasn't very good at scaling, and printed the picture, basically put carbon paper underneath, and then traced with a scribe over it and got a graphite version of the lines underneath. That's kind of problematic. As you're engraving in there, it's very easy to rub off the graphite lines that you had. The other issue is that the graphite lines tend to be much wider than the silver that I was using. So I'd been looking for a better way of doing it, and I found with the laser engraver I could go and just lightly score the line on there. It doesn't use the laser for really digging down as far as you need to into the wood. That's primarily because with this process you don't remove any material. You basically plunge cut down into the wood, push the wire into it, and then wet the wood, and the wood will swell up and hold the wire in place. So you don't want to remove any material. So it made a nice way of transferring a fairly, not real complex image, but transferring the image to the wood. The other thing I use the laser for, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but I put my initials and the date on the inside of the back spring. Wally, I don't know if you're going to see this. I'm not going to tell you it's there. You'll have to find it yourself. So that was just kind of a fun way of doing that. The other thing I did was also kind of in response to an issue I had with this one, where the spring on it was too strong, and that led to the pull problem. The other issue was that as you open and close this, the corner of the tang there would dig into the spring, and it would scratch it. It would pull out little metal slivers, and it would just make the opening and closing of the knife rougher and rougher every time you used it. And I couldn't figure out how to fix this at the time I was working on this knife. I don't have much experience with metal. I'm much more comfortable with wood. So I didn't quite understand what was going on there. I kept trying to, sand it down and file it down and make it smooth and all that. And it really didn't help. So when I got to this knife, I had basically the same problem. But by then I'd figured out that it seemed to be that the spring tempering was off, and the spring was not as hard as the knife blade was. And that's what was causing the problem, or at least that was my theory. So I went and got out a torch and learned a little bit of basic metalworking and re-hardened the front part of the spring. There wasn't any reason to do it to the back, and that seemed to have solved the problem. This one, the pull is a lot better because I also cut out the inside of the spring down in here to lighten it up. But it's also a lot smoother because of the hardening I did to the spring. So just a couple of the other technical issues and things I learned from doing the first one that I applied to the second knife. I don't know that I'm going to do any more of these. I'm planning on, giving this to my brother-in-law in the next few days, and that's why I'm making this video now, because I won't have it again. It's just kind of a one-time thing. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. It was really kind of a fun thing to do. I'm definitely going to be doing covers on other knives, but maybe nothing quite like this again. That's all I have. Thanks for watching. Take care.